All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Podcast 83, brought to you by DTE Energy. We appreciate everyone tuning in this week. Happy St. Patrick's Day week. Megan, I hope you had a good weekend. Did you do anything fun this weekend?
Yeah. I don't know if I'd put it in the category of fun. We are completing our RV renovation. We've updated our camper, getting it ready for summer. So we were in a very tiny little space doing some painting and tile work. So it wasn't fun, but it means summer's close, right?
Well, hopefully you kept the windows open. You guys weren't just inhaling fumes the whole weekend. Funny story, a buddy of mine in college bought an RV after we graduated college. You know what he called it? Snots, of course. From Christmas Vacation, you remember the dog that snotted everywhere in the RV, Snots?
Yeah.
You didn't find that very funny. No.
I
Okay.
just don't recall that part of the movie, but okay, I'll take your word for it.
All right, thanks. Well, you just have Megan and I this week. Dina's unable to participate, but we do have some items we want to bring everyone up to speed on. We do, of course, want to touch again on Open Meetings Act as we approach the end of this month. There's some changes that are occurring that we want to make sure everyone's aware of. And of course, last week, the federal rescue plan was signed by President Biden, so we want to touch on that as well. So Megan, first, why don't you bring us up to speed on Open Meetings Act, where we're at, what some of the questions we're hearing are.
Yeah, absolutely. So as a reminder, the March 31st deadline is coming soon. That is the ability for boards to hold virtual sessions for any reason beyond March 31st. Counties can continue to operate virtually as long as they have a local declared state of emergency. We are still getting a lot of questions about what if we choose to go in person, have some type of hybrid capability? What if we don't declare a state of emergency? And so those are some of the questions that we've been trying to field and to clarify for members. And we can take questions after this as well. But basically, if your county doesn't have a declared state of emergency and you must resume to in-person meetings, then the capacity gathering cap is at 25 for indoors, meaning if that 26 person shows up, you do have to be able to accommodate them, whether that's in an overflow room with two-way communication. They would have to be able to respond and provide their public input if they wish to do so. So we do think that the best way to move forward is to continue having a local state of emergency declared, posting for a hybrid session. This way, if you have that ability for them to join publicly, then they can do so, and you can point to that. But just note that if you don't have a local declaration in place and you are meeting in person, you would be in violation of OMA if you're turning anyone away when you get to that capacity, 25 limit capacity.
Yeah, the real issue becomes is that while if you didn't have a local declaration, you would have to meet in person, but then you'd be in violation of the DHH capacity restrictions, and that's where things start to get a little hairy. We had an article about it in our last week's legislative update, but it, like Megan said, the best case scenario or the safest way for folks to do it is to either post a virtual meeting, then you can meet in person, and if you don't have many people attend, they can attend as long as you're meeting those DHHS capacity restrictions, and then allow for participation remotely. So whether that's a phone call, online, whatever the case may be. If you do post for an in-person meeting, you do need to make sure you make everyone available to the meeting, whether it's in a separate room, outside, that becomes a little more complicated. So that's why we're recommending the hybrid option at this point until we see changes on the DHHS capacity restrictions. So we could see changes. I think the current recommendations or current restrictions are until the middle of April, right, Megan?
Yeah, we can double check it. I think it's April 13th, maybe.
Yeah, it's somewhere around there. But we could see changes before that or up until that point. And of course, as more and more people get vaccinated, we do expect those those restrictions to be loosened up a little bit. So thank you for that. All right, moving along, let's talk, Federal American Rescue Plan. Obviously a significant investment in county government, unprecedented investment in county government, something we've never seen before, to the tune of about $1.9 billion of the total plan coming to Michigan counties. That's direct to Michigan counties. Every county is getting direct funding. Meghann, what are some of the questions you're hearing about that? I mean, we can kind of run through, maybe let's do that. Let's run through some of what we know. There's a lot we don't know at this point, even though it's been signed into law. I think U.S. Treasury, I think it's important to note there's going to be more guidance coming from U.S. Treasury on this. And until we see that guidance, we will not be able to put, definitive recommendations together until we see that. But we do know some things right now. So Meghann, you want to touch on some of the things we do know?
Yeah, absolutely. I think some of the things that we've been hearing and we've been talking about a lot internally is kind of the process for getting that money out. So as Steve, you mentioned, it is direct aid to county governments. But the caveat is the first 50% will be sent out within 60 days of enactment. So 60 days of what, last Thursday or Friday. And then the remaining half is going to be sent out no earlier than 12 months from then. So you won't see that second wave of funding come in until after the first year. But then we just want to make sure too that members are realizing that this is really long term, right? You have until December 31st of 2024 to spend that amount of money. So it does look like a great deal of money potentially coming to the county, but it's over a long period of time. And I think it might be a good idea to kind of wait in some cases to see what the real fallout is potentially from property tax values, from businesses closing, what your counties really need in response to COVID and the economic impacts of all of this.
Yeah, I agree.
Do you want to talk about a little bit of what it could be used for as well?
Yeah. So, I mean, right now, what some of the language in the legislation says is that can be to respond to or mitigate public health emergency with respects to COVID-19. So this could include assistance to households, small businesses, nonprofits, or specific industries such as tourism, travel, hospitality. By no means an all-inclusive list, but just some thoughts on where those funds could be used. It also can be used, and this is different than the CARES funding, can be used for revenue loss. So when Meghann's saying, we have until 2024, that's where the revenue loss component of this package is important, because we don't know what happens to property taxes as more people are working remotely. Is there more pressure on commercial real estate taxes to go down, or due to people losing their jobs, are there more foreclosures out there? So I think that's important to know. We've been asked the question. I think it's a very good question. What about last year's last revenue sharing payment that was cut and CARES Act money was given? So, unrestricted funds were taken away and restricted funds were put in its place. So is that considered revenue loss? I would say yes, but we're looking for that guidance from U.S. Treasury yet. Some other things that it can be used for: water, sewer, broadband infrastructure. That's an important note, that there was actually language in there for broadband infrastructure. Now, how loose are those definitions going to be? Is it any sort of infrastructure? Is it any sort of water, sewer infrastructure improvement? We don't know yet. I think that's some of the things we're looking for guidance on. There's an essential work premium pay that can be used for up to $13 per hour, but it can't be more than $25,000 for any single eligible worker. So those are described in the fund.
There's also things that it can't be used for, right? So it's very specific that it cannot be used for any sort of pension fund, which is something that I don't think came as a shock at all from just conversations even last year with some of our congressional leaders.
Right, and it was specific, in the state can't cut any sort of tax revenue in response to these funds. So, because the states are getting money too. So this is not just going to counties or cities or townships, but everyone is getting a portion of these funds. You're gonna have to certify these funds. There's gonna be an audit. So there's various things like that people are gonna have to make sure that they're dotting their I's and crossing their T's. And as we get more guidance, we'll of course share that with you. One thing, was brought up in a meeting this morning we were in, we'll want to make sure of too, is that it's not a moving target. We're not getting different, direction as we move along this 3-year process of expending these funds, that things are changed over time. So, like I said, I think it's an significant investment, an incredible investment in county government. I think, counties do have an option not to take these funds should they not want to. That is always an option. But I think it would be, important to note that you can use these funds to give back to your local communities too. And how can you coordinate that effort with your other cities and townships that are getting funds to help those businesses that have been really hurt, whether it's your restaurant industries or other small businesses that have had to close their doors.
Yeah, and to that point, and something we've been hearing and talking about since last week with members, as you have conversations locally, also know that those other municipalities and locals also are getting direct aid. It is a little different formula on how they're getting that allocated. However, it's really important to know. So when they come and say, well, we think that, we should have X amount of dollars from the county, it should be balanced with what did they receive, what can their funds be spent on, and maybe how those resources can be pooled and used to the greater good of everyone, right? So, I think there's going to be a lot of, hopefully good collaboration, but certainly a lot more guidance that needs to come out in the hopefully coming weeks and months, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. And before I forget, I forgot to note it. If you do have questions, feel free to type them in the chat. We'll be happy to answer them. Of course, if you have questions after the fact, always feel free to email us and we'll be happy to answer them. One other thing to note is there was some extra funding for those counties that get PILT. About, I think it was 10 billion. Does that sound right, Dean, Meghann? I don't have it in front of me, but yes, there was extra funding for PILT funding for those counties as well.
Yeah, it was, I'm looking at the NACO documents here, which is all available online on our website as well. It says there's an additional 1.5 billion for eligible revenue sharing counties that receive PILT payments.
Yep.
Derek, I think the 10 billion, there was additional 10 billion for very specific coronavirus capital outlay projects.
Right, including broadband. Derek, do we have any questions at this point?
We do have one question at this time. Martin Marshall down in Lenawee County. Are other local governments receiving funding, such as cities and villages?
Yes, absolutely. So the way the distribution was there's an equal amount of money given to counties and other municipalities. It was split 50-50. However, the distribution model was much different. Counties funding was distributed based on purely on population, whereas other local units of government were distributed based on their CBDG formula, which is an economic development kind of block grant funding formula that they've had in the past. So their distribution was different. And then of course, states got funding as well, and same as well as tribal communities as well. So yes, everyone got some, it was just how it was distributed was a little different.
And that is it for questions right now.
All right, we'll give it a few more minutes since I forgot to announce it. We are going to be working on some best practices, for lack of a better term, that we will be sending out on, kind of, I guess you could call it lessons learned, because we did have some counties that received CARES Act funding the first time around, and they've been very helpful with us in sharing some of the best practices they had, some of the things they learned, problems they had, because a lot of them did do community grants for their small businesses. And that can get a little dicey on how you do that and who you select and not select and how do you track it. So we're working on some things like that. It's like I said, it's still kind of early in its development, but hopefully in the next 3 weeks or so, 4 weeks or so, we hopefully will have something that we can share with folks as far as how to use these funds. What are some best practices for those funds? Derek, anything yet?
Yes, Bud Norman has a question. Isn't there a formula for the number of people allowed in a space that may be lower than the 25 restriction, and does that still apply? And I am working to share my screen here because I've got the, no?
Yep, we can see it.
Can everybody see that?
Yep.
All right, so there's the actual epidemic order fact sheet on gatherings.
So yeah, it says indoors up to 25 persons, right, Derek? And that does not, it doesn't take into account size, right?
Well, let's see as we scroll down here. Retail. I'm just scrolling as we're going here. Let's see what. Oh.
Yeah, I think some of the capacity requirements, and maybe Bud, this is what you're getting to. You know, like the restaurants are at 50%. So, you know, maybe that. But as far as county meetings, I believe we have to follow the indoor non-residential visitation guidance, which would cap it at 25 people maximum. So I think that's even if you're in your largest building, you would still only be able to have that 25 person meeting.
All right, any other questions?
Yep. Oh, yep, now they're starting to flow in. Do you think some of the held up money in the State House from, all right, well, Jim Marino, Jim, I think you left a word out here. I'm not, but he's asking a question about the held up money at the Michigan Capitol from the last round of federal aid, not the most recent round.
So that's, I think, our supplemental fund, that supplemental bill that went through, Meghann.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, some of that is now approved. The governor did veto some line items because there was some strings attached to some line items or things that the governor didn't necessarily agree to or wanted, you know, in addition to what the legislature had put forward. So, so there was about $2.3 billion that was allocated for small business relief programs, direct care worker, hazard pay, vaccine distribution, continued testing. So a lot of that was signed by the governor. That being said, there were some small business line items, some $150 million for unemployment insurance agency trust fund that was line item vetoed. And I think, you know, in the governor's veto letter, it's very clear that these things were vetoed because she felt that there should be some ties to extension of the unemployment benefit to 26 weeks moving forward. Some things that I think she's, you know, saying back to legislature, this should have been a better negotiation process. Legislature coming in and saying, well, we think that it should have been a better negotiation process on how to reopen the state or how to put limits in place. And so, yes, some of those things were tied to policy bills. Senate Bill 1 that would restrict the Department of Health and Human Services director to enforce public health orders past 28 days. That's actually just before the governor's office or presented to the governor just I think on Friday last week. So that has not been either approved or disapproved by her yet. The $2 billion that was federal education money, the legislature had allocated that, sent that to the governor's desk with about 800 million of it tied to a bill that would give local health departments the ability to shut down in-person instruction at schools if they met certain metrics. She did veto that bill. So now that 800 million is really, I think, up for debate. I think the legislature does not think that that can be allocated now because of the veto of House Bill 4049. The governor's legal counsel thinks maybe there is some way to get around that because of the federal money and how all of those strings are attached. So there's still money to be allocated, not only what was vetoed by the governor, but the legislature didn't send her the full nearly $5.5 billion to begin with. So we are still talking about fiscal year 21 budgets, and we expect more supplementals.
Good old-fashioned political tug of war.
Okay, next question, and then a kind of a comment related to it. Martin Marshall again. Will there be information on what all is in the federal package so that we are not duplicating benefits to businesses and residents that are included in the package? And then Von Begic from Bay noted that he is listening to a NACO call right now and talking about how the money is going to be released. So Steve, if you kind of want to hit on that point about the the 50-50 split there.
Yeah, so Martin, yeah, as soon as we have something that kind of shares the breadth of the package, we'll have that. I think undoubtedly people are going to get duplicate funds when you have this many different entities getting funding, and with the way the language is now, it's really up to those entities to follow U.S. Treasury guidelines to distribute those funds. You could potentially have your cities and counties and state even distributing relief funds to certain businesses that could apply. Now, one thing we're trying to navigate, and I know some counties have done this, is how do you kind of combine efforts at a local level? So how could the county potentially partner with its other locals to put together funding so that you're not doing duplicative work? And that's something we're trying to figure out to see if we can help with that. But I think there's going to be duplicate funds. And yeah, just to touch again on Meghann touched a little bit on it. The half of the first round of funds, which is half the funding, will be within 60 days, distributed within 60 days. Then the second half will be no sooner than 12 months. So after 12 months. So you got 60 days and then at least a year until those funds will be distributed. Now those funds don't have to be used until December 31st, 2024. So you've got basically 3 years to use those funds. Any other questions, Derek?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Gwen Allgeier, and I apologize if I have butchered that. 3 of our commissioners refused to wear masks in our commission meeting. Should the public be allowed into the room if they wear masks, but our commissioners do not? And I'm gonna post back up this fact sheet because there is some text that refers to that.
Yeah, and we're not, Meghann and I aren't attorneys, so I think that's something to refer to your in-house counsel on how to handle that situation. It does talk about face masks are still required, but if they do have a health issue, then there's exemptions for those rules if someone has a health condition that prohibits them from wearing a mask. And I don't know what any health conditions are, so I can't really comment on that, but you can see what the MDHHS order says there. Any other questions?
Yeah, just kind of a sequence of verification from Patty Dibb and Macomb. Again, on meetings, confirming that even with the capacity limits, you're still required to maintain the 6 feet of spacing.
Correct. That's part of the MDHHS order, 6 feet of spacing, correct.
And that gets us out of all the questions.
All right, well, great. Thank you, everyone. We appreciate the feedback. Of course, if anything comes up after this and you have questions, feel free to email any of our staff. We'll be happy to get you an answer as quick as possible. Thank you, Meghann. I know Dina's on the NACO call right now, so we're kind of dividing and conquering today. So hopefully we'll have some, and as we get more information on this plan, the federal plan, American Rescue Plan, we'll be sure to share it with you, especially on our Friday updates, but throughout the week. And thank you to DTE Energy. So appreciate it. Thanks, everyone.